Welcome back. We turn now to the troubling new warning about something that could be on your dinner table tonight and a type of food that many parents pack for school lunches. The World Health Organization now says that hot dogs and cold cuts raise the risk of colon cancer and other cancers, and they're now putting hot dogs and bacon and even some lunch meats in the same risk category as smoking and asbestos. Correspondent Lindsay Davis has more.
Alarming news about foods so many of us eat every day. Bacon, hot dogs, lunch meat, all now classified in the same category as cigarettes and asbestos. They can cause cancer, according to the World Health Organization, and that's not all. The WHO Advisory Committee also finding that unprocessed red meat is probably carcinogenic. The report, which was based on an analysis of more than 800 studies, asserts that simply eating 50 grams of processed meat each day can increase the risk of colon cancer by 18%. Here's some food for thought. The 50 grams cited in the report is the equivalent of 1.8 ounces of meat. But a typical deli sandwich has more than 4.5 ounces of meat. And this is what 1.8 ounces looks like. According to the report, 34,000 cancer deaths could be attributed to diets high in processed meat in 2012. That's out of the 8.2 million deaths caused worldwide by cancer. To put that in perspective, 1 million of those deaths could be attributed to smoking. The WHO panel did say red meat does have nutritional value, but the meat industry is crying foul. The North American Meat Institute telling ABC News in a statement that classifying red and processed meat as cancer hazards defies both common sense and numerous studies showing no correlation between meat and cancer. It's also recommended that you not fry or grill your meat on charcoal, which can release carcinogens. Lindsay Davis, ABC News, New York.
Dr. Jeffrey Elton is a former White House physician. He's now the medical director at the Presidential Health Care Center in Northwest. Dr. Elton, always great to be able to speak with you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Bruce.
Is the World Health Organization warning supported by the data, by the research?
Well, they studied 800 prior studies, and some of the studies indicated that there was a risk, and some didn't. But the propensity of most of those studies, in their opinion, and they were 20 experts, and this is looking internationally and not just in the United States, demonstrated that there was a level of degree of concern that they wanted to classify these foods as being a carcinogenic risk.
Is this enough, in your view, for the average family to alter their food decisions, what they eat and how often?
Well, first of all, it's good to cook food, because if it's not cooked, you have risk of bacterial infections, so you generally want to cook it, and realizing that people are going to choose to eat things, whether you go to a ball game and have a hot dog, or if you have cold cuts, it's probably not going to leave the staple of the United States dietary intake. However, you should probably limit those foods, because we've known for a long time, particularly because of nitrosamines and other substances, that charcoal broiled things and processed foods carry some risk.
I remember early in my career talking with the spokesman, and I wish I could come up with his name. He was there for forever. He was with the Tobacco Institute, and Walter Merriman. Walter Merriman said for quite a long time there was no established connection between cancer and smoking, and of course that was probably wrong at the time, and no one believes that anymore today. When the industry in response to the World Health Organization warning says there's no correlation, does that take you back to that era when the smoking people just completely shut the door on any talk of risk?
I remember those discussions about tobacco as well, and it does somewhat bring back the memories of it. Though the smoking has a stronger link to cancer than does the processed foods and the red meats. I think you have to look at the statistics there. They're quoting an 18% increase in risk. And so people interpret that like, oh my gosh, if I have some red meat, I've got to now get an 18% risk when I had 0 before. So if you really look at the numbers, though, about 5% of people are going to get gastrointestinal cancers over the course of life. This is a 17% increase on that, which raises it from 5% to only 6% if you have that kind of intake. So it's not as much of a jump as you had with cigarette smoking.
Given the nutritional benefits of some of the types of food that we're talking about here, are most families on safe ground if they eat a balanced diet and limit their red meat, but do have it occasionally?
I think you're probably okay that way. And there's a lot of other confounding factors to consider, whether you have the fruits and vegetables that you're having the intake as well. And then there's also another point in all this that I think is not a teaching point that could have come well out of this, is that, if there's a baseline 5% risk of colon cancer in the nation or in the world, it would make sense to make sure everybody gets their colonoscopies, regardless of whether you're eating these foods or not.
Been there, done that. At the risk of oversharing. But yeah, the warning well heeded. Dr. Elton, always great being able to tap you for your advice. Thanks very much for your time this time.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Jeffrey Elton, former White House physician, now the medical director at the Presidential Healthcare Center in Northwest. We turn now to the budget agreement that congressional Republicans reached with the White House overnight. Secret talks concluding in a deal impacting spending, the debt cap, and agency funding. This morning, outgoing Speaker John Boehner hailed the deal as a breakthrough that will smooth government functioning for the next 2 years. Politico Sungmin Kim joins us now with more on all of this. Sungmin, thanks for your time. This sounds like a big breakthrough. Can we call it a grand bargain?
Actually, don't call it a grand bargain just yet. It's a very small fraction of the overall federal budget. It doesn't reform Medicare. It doesn't raise taxes. So this is kind of a small potatoes here. But for a Congress that can't really agree on anything with each other and with the White House, this is a pretty big deal. And also helps kind of ease the threat of a government shutdown, starting as early as next month when the Congress has to pass a broader funding deal, and also through the next year's election.
If it keeps us from any of these moments where it looks like things are going to run off the rails and agency workers are going to be told to stay home, and the work of the different departments and agencies and the federal bureaucracy generally gets put on hold, and then you think about the shock to the system of something happening with the debt cap and how the markets have reacted in the past, how they might react again. If all this deal does is foreclosed on any of that stuff happening for the next year or two, it seems huge to me. Am I overstating?
No, it is a very big deal in that aspect, and it actually comes at a critical time here on Capitol Hill, because there's going to be a very big, there's set to be a very big change in leadership in the House of Representatives later this week. We have Paul Ryan, who was the 2012 vice presidential nominee, who is set to take over as the Speaker of the House. And the reason why this deal is so important is that the outgoing Speaker John Boehner, kind of what he's like to say, that it cleans out the barn for the new leadership. It means that Paul Ryan is not going into his new leadership job with all these messes that he has to deal with, whether it's raising the nation's debt limit or trying to figure out a broader budget deal, right during the holidays. So it's a very big deal in that aspect. But in terms of a grand bargain, I don't think so.
The next aspect of this, I gather, is what the rank and file is how the rank and file reacts. Both parties, both chambers. This falls to them now, correct?
Exactly. Right now, people are still digesting the legislation. It posted just before midnight last night, so obviously aides and lawmakers are kind of pouring through the fine print on the bills. Right now, you have a lot of conservative opposition because it does raise government spending, even if it's offset by various small revenue raisers or spending cuts elsewhere. They don't like the fact that this budget boosts spending, period. And we're starting to hear some quiet concerns from the progressive. It does deal with some changes to Social Security in terms of the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. It's a little too early to weigh in on, what the actual real-life impact of those changes are. People who negotiated the deal say all these changes are meant to root out fraud in the system, but whether that becomes a real problem for progressives is another storyline that we're watching.
Is this something that could pass with not just considerable Democratic support in the House, but is it possible this deal will have more Democratic than Republican support in the House? And if so, does this represent a real change of strategy for Speaker Boehner as he enters the final hours and almost minutes of his speakership?
It's not something new that Speaker Boehner has had to rely on Democrats to carry a bulk of these really tough votes. Democrats, and we're expecting Democrats in the House and in the Senate as well to carry a kind of a big chunk of the load in terms of providing the votes for this budget deal and lifting the debt limit when it comes up later this week. But Boehner, the Speaker has had to rely on Democrats time and time again. Whether it's any one of those, the vote to reopen the government after the 2013 government shutdown, the vote to fund the Department of Homeland Security earlier this year, the short-term spending resolution that we just had in September. He's had to rely on Democrats. So it's really, it really speaks to kind of the division in the Republican conference right now in terms of, on these major fiscal issues. So that's why Democrats have kind of provided this well of votes time and time again.
This will be an interesting one to follow, and we'll be talking tomorrow with Northern Virginia Congressman Rob Whitman. We'll talk with him live about all of this. For now, Sungmin Kim, she covers Congress for Politico, a reporter at Politico. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your joining us. We'll talk with you again.
Thanks for having me.
We'll step aside, back with more News Talk in a moment.